person who schedules our programs. So, as per usual, if you would please complete an evaluation form when you leave so that we can get your feedback about what you liked and didn't like, any other ideas you have for future programs. But I guess I'll just turn the program over to our speaker, Mark Mastromarino.
All right. Thank you. This year, from July 18th through October 14th, Derry residents can visit 11 agricultural fairs in New Hampshire, including the Hillsborough County Fair in New Boston and the Deerfield Fair, 20 miles away. If they want to attend one of their own Derry agricultural fairs, they'll have to travel back in time at least 66 years. My background is I grew up in Londonderry and began research agricultural fairs and agricultural societies as an undergraduate at Boston College in 1982. And then I continued that research as a graduate student at William & Mary in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I focused mostly on Massachusetts, as that's where the modern agricultural fair originated. And I really haven't looked at New Hampshire fairs or Derry fairs in particular until I moved back to the area about a year ago. So that's a way of explaining that this is a very preliminary look, kind of just a taste of the fair this evening. And I'm hoping that if there's anyone in the audience, besides Mr. Holmes, who's familiar with the most recent fair, the West Rockingham Fair from the 1940s, that they can help further my research. And I do want to acknowledge Rick's help in generously sharing a lot of his files with me, and Karen Blanford Anderson, the head of the Heritage Commission and the curator of the Derry History Museum, for access to the collection. Okay, there are three major points I want to make about agricultural fairs in Derry, Londonderry agricultural fairs. There's no direct continuity between 18th century fairs and modern agricultural fairs. Two, fairs are multifunctional events, so that old and new share many of the same features in varying proportions. And three, these features and proportions reflect the greater society and culture that created the local institution. Okay, let's start with the definition. What is a fair? Webster's originated in the 13th century from Middle English fair, from the Anglo-French and medieval Latin feria, meaning a weekday fair, which came from the late Latin for a festal day, and trace it back to Latin feriae, which is plural, meaning holidays. It's a gathering of buyers and sellers at a particular time and place for trade, or a competitive exhibit, usually with accompanying entertainment and amusements, such as an agricultural fair. B, an exhibition designed to acquaint prospective buyers or the general public with the product, such as a book fair. C, an exposition that promotes the availability of services or opportunities, such as a health fair or a job fair. Or D, a sale of assorted articles, usually for a charitable purpose. Now there are various levels or various hierarchy of fairs, starting with the local, could be a church community event such as Derry Fest that'll be occurring in a couple of weeks. Local or community Grange fairs, county fairs, state fairs, regional fairs like the Eastern States Exposition, even national events, and world fairs. My talk tonight is specifically on agricultural fairs, which I've defined as a modern rural harvest time celebration sponsored annually by a local, county, state, or regional agricultural organization, at which superior farm animals and products are exhibited and compete for pre-announced premiums, which are prizes, and to which attendance is attracted by social, recreational, and commercial opportunities. Refer to them as modern agricultural fairs, not just because they're chronologically, but they're modern in philosophy as well. They're pragmatic and result-oriented. They institutionalize emulation, ambition, and the liberal values of competition and self-interest. So it's a market economy that were developed in a market economy as opposed to a pre-capitalist moral economy of communal cooperation, such as in the early colonial period. They're also considered modern in that they're progressive and they're looking forward, not back. And, well, originally, now nostalgia is a large part of agricultural fairs. And they're reformist. They're founded to improve agriculture and traditional manners and morals. Okay, now I want to contrast the modern agricultural fair to the market fair, which were traditional and medieval European events granted by monarchs to local bishops, abbots, noblemen, manor lords, or city corporations in order to facilitate the gathering of merchants who took advantage of a popular festivity of saints' days, thus holy days, to sell their wares. These were the essential tools of long-distance trade in early medieval Europe. 5,000 charters were granted between 1200 and 1400 on the continent and in England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. But they became an archaic form of exchange across Europe by the 18th century, as other economic institutions fulfilled their commercial and credit functions, such as stores and banks. Now, market fairs should be differentiated between markets, which were regular weekly meetings for the purpose of trade by private purchase or sale. Okay, I want to start talking about the Derry fairs, Londonderry. I'll use the term interchangeably because, of course, Derry was created in 1827. That was originally part of Londonderry, or Londonderry was originally part of Derry, depending on which way you want to look at it. And in Europe, market fairs were part of the economy and social life of Northern Ireland, where Derry's Ulster Scots settlers originated, as well as in nearby Ireland and Scotland. In country Antrim, in Northern Ireland, there were several fairs, market fairs, that James McGregor and his cohorts might have been familiar with. Ballycarry Fair dating to the 1600s, and the Presbyterian Church in Ballycarry is the oldest one in Ireland, founded in 1613. The fair was described by James Orr, the bard of Ballycarry, in an Ulster Scots verse, which I haven't found yet. And if I had, I probably couldn't read it aloud. Anyways. But he was a contemporary of Robert Burns, and that was about 75 miles from Londonderry, in Northern Ireland. Also, Ballycastle held the Old Lammas Fair, and is still holding it in 2009. I mean, this picture's from 2009. It's held last Monday and Tuesday of August since the early 1600s. Bargains are struck between horse buyers and sellers. There's singing and dancing in the streets. And overall, there's a carnival atmosphere. It's probably very much like it was in the old days. So while the goods in the stalls may reflect 21st century life, the Old Lammas Fair itself is an ongoing reminder of Ireland's rich culture and heritage. It was also inspiration for one of a popular song, The Old Lammas Fair, by John Henry Macaulay. I downloaded an MP3 file of that, but I won't have time to play that. The Ballycarry Fair was about 50 miles from Londonderry. Also the Temple Patrick Fair, described by poet Samuel Thompson, was 62 miles from Londonderry. And in Ireland itself, there's the Enniskerry Fair in County Wicklow, and my favorite, Donnybrook Fair. Which was held in Dublin, Ireland. It's an 8 to 15 day event in August and September, which was originally granted by King John in 1204 to compensate Dubliners for the expense of building walls and defenses around the city. But by the mid-19th century, it became the most important fair on the island of Ireland. Originally billed as a horse fair, the run-up to the event would see traders of everything from exotic fruits to horse manure set up their stalls on Donnybrook Green. The actual buying and selling of wares was a cover of what was in essence a fortnight-long drinking session. It had become a cacophonous event famed for music, heavy drinking, cockfighting, and shillelagh swinging. By 1867, Walter Begho references the fair, saying, "The only principle recognized was akin to that recommended to the traditionary Irishman on his visit to Donnybrook Fair. Wherever you see a head, hit it." Another quote gives some idea of the pandemonium, appeared in August 1778. So as early as 1778 it was degenerated. How irksome it was to friends of the industry and well-being of society to hear that upwards of 50,000 persons visited the fair on the previous Sunday and returned to the city like intoxicated savages. Alongside references to open displays of drunkenness, promiscuity, and a general lack of respect for authority, gotta love the Donnybrook Fair. It's largely remembered for its fights, and its contribution to the English language dictates this. The phrase Donnybrook, which whenever I hear, I think of hockey for some reason. It's largely remembered for its fights. The daily madness often subsided to nightly slumber, and when stallholders shut up shop around midnight, participants too drunk to make their way home would simply sleep on site, and the party would just continue where it left off the next morning. A favorite pastime of younger fairgoers was to buy cheap treacle tarts, known as treacle tillies, and walk, or is that treacle? And walk around the fair sticking them to the backs of unsuspecting revelers. Attempts to have it abolished by the beginning of the 19th century were made, but successive license holders had by law the right to hold the fair, and they refused to bow to public pressure. The Committee for the Abolition of Donnybrook Fair was established to acquire the license in order to put an end to it, and they purchased it in 1855 for £3,000 under the auspices of the Lord Mayor. Okay, in Scotland, I should also mention the Glasgow Fair, which is still being held in 1769. In England, one of the most famous market fairs was the Bartholomew Fair in Smithfield, near London, which was held on the feast days of St. Bartholomew, beginning in the 12th century. And this is a good example of how the fair started and degenerated. The sick came to pray for healing at the Priory's altar on the feast day of St. Bartholomew, August 25th. The Priory sold woolen cloth on which its wealth depended. Chapmans and peddlers hawked wares in the churchyard. Horses, oxen, and sheep were offered for sale. And even after the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, the fairs continued. As Smithville became the center of the London meat trade in the 17th century. The carnivalesque minstrels, mummers, acrobats, and other entertainment continued right up until the fair was abolished in the mid-19th century. It lasted through the 1700s despite clerical denunciations. So here's a picture of the Smithville Fair, 1730s, and then you see it's more of an entertainment venue. This is 1808.
Looks like a Dunkin' Donuts.
There's one in every corner. There's an old proverb, coming home from the fair is not the same as coming home from market. The whole spirit of the fair was being a world apart from ordinary rural routine, a vehicle of escapism. It provided socially sanctioned suspension of the everyday routines, relationships, rules, just like pre-Lenten carnival celebrations in the Catholic world. Think of like Mardi Gras today. So they provide popular amusement, exciting spectacle, public ritual, as well as a venue for selling and buying. So in America, the settlers brought this institution with them, the market fair. The first ones were held in New Netherland on Manhattan Island by the Dutch in the 1620s. And semi-annual fairs were held in Boston, Salem, Watertown, and Dorchester from 1633 to 1672. New Haven, Connecticut, 1644. And now we get to New Hampshire. The first market fair in New Hampshire was the Londonderry Fair. Now, Londonderry was settled by the Ulster Scots, as we know. Started producing potatoes, linen, cloth, and thread. They had livestock, horses, cattle, sheep. And the fair, they requested in the fair and their charter be granted. And the charter reads, on every Wednesday in the week, forever they may hold, keep, and enjoy a market, so it's a weekly market, for the selling, buying goods, wares, merchandise, and all kinds of creatures, endowed with the usual privileges, profits, and immunities as other market towns usually hold, possess, and enjoy. And 2 fairs annually forever. The first to be held or kept within the said town on the 8th day of October next, and the other on the 8th of May, in like manner. Provided that if it so should happen that at any time either those fall on the Lord's day, then the said fair shall be held and kept the day following. So that was 1722, and there really isn't a lot. I mean, there are several notices that appear in the papers, newspapers, but not during the 18th century. By 1807, there were an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 people that came to Londonderry for the fairs, and there were up to 500 head of beef cattle. This is a notice of 1831. Old Derry Fair, the annual fair at Derry, this is in the New Hampshire Patriot, I believe. The annual fair at Derry will commence on Tuesday, the 25th of October instant. On Wednesday and Thursday, October 26th and 27th, will be sold at auction at the fair 10 first-rate horses, several pairs of oxen, some cows, and a fine first-rate short-horn Durham breed English bull. So this is already after the period of agricultural improvement had begun with improved livestock breeds. This particular Durham bull, this portrait is from 1802, It weighed 2,646 pounds, which gives meaning to the term fat counting. Also at the fair, carriages, chains, or maybe that's chases, I'm not sure, wagons, etc. And on Friday, the annual purse will be awarded to the swiftest horse. So we have so that's a clue as to what's happening to the fair, not just that horses were important, but horse racing as a major entertainment. In 1837, another notice of the fair. The annual fair in Derry, New Hampshire will commence on Tuesday, the 24th of October, and continue through the week, so it's lasting a week now, on the old ground or the meeting house. Good accommodations furnished and much pleasure and profit may be expected by those engaged in racing, buying, selling, and exchanging horses, also for those engaged in various kinds of trade, etc. Okay, a description in the New Portsmouth, New Hampshire News and Literary Gazette by an unnamed correspondent, yes, just identified by the initial G. He described the annual fair before Thanksgiving after the manner of those of Enniskerry in Ireland, at which all the country flocked to a focus, bringing with them the products of their industry and the superfluities of their household goods, to be exchanged, bartered, and sold. These fairs lasted 3 days, at the termination of which the Irish and the Yankee customs were gently intermingled. The reel, the country dance, and all the sports incident to those portions of either country were introduced. Parties were given, suppers were served up, mutual acquaintances were made, felicitations were reciprocated, lovers' vows were exchanged, marriages took place. And the result of these fairs were a sturdy race of husbandmen whose superiors it would be difficult to find. Reverend Edward L. Parker of the First Parish Church wrote in 1851 that the original design of the fair was good. From some years it was of public use and convenience, affording an opportunity to the inhabitants of this and the adjoining towns to meet and exchange commodities. It was conducted with order and propriety. The assemblage was usually large. Merchants from Haverhill, Salem, and even Boston were present with goods, and every variety of home manufacture was here collected. The common was usually surrounded with tents containing merchandise and with pens of cattle, sheep, and swine for sale or exchange. Okay, as we can guess, the Londonderry Fair was an amusement event, just like the old market fairs in the old world. The 1837 correspondent called "Old Horses, Rum, Rowdyism, and Gingerbread" were had. The Reverend Parker wrote that the state of society at length changing, the country becoming generally settled, stores being multiplied, and the means of communication with our large towns greatly improved, the fair became of little or no use, was soon perverted from its original design, and for many years proved a moral nuisance, attracting chiefly the more corrupt portion of the community and exhibiting for successive days each year scenes of vice and folly in some of their worst forms. Attempts were consequently made by the town from time to time to regulate the fair and thus correct the evil, but with little success. So there's the Irish inheritance. Poet John Greenleaf Whittier, born in Haverhill, Mass., 1807, wrote that the Londonderry Fair was established in imitation of those that they had been familiar with in Ireland. Thither came annually all manner of horse jockeys and peddlers, gentlemen and beggars, dancers and fiddlers. Strong drink abounded, a wild, frolicking, drinking, fiddling, courting, horse racing, riotous merrymaking, a sort of Protestant carnival, relaxing the grimness of Puritanism for leagues around it. And G, in the 1847 Exeter newsletter, wrote, "The fair in early days was a place of great resort far and near, and was celebrated in New England as Donnybrook is in Ireland." So drinking was a major part. Many booths sold spirituous liquors and beer and cider by the glass or jug. And in 1798, the town voted to confine the fair to 2 days, as it had expanded, in May and October, and that no booth shall be used after 9 o'clock in the evening of fair days for selling merchandise or spirituous or fermented liquor or furnishing any kind of entertainment, or anyone selling liquor for 3 days before and 3 days after the fair, near the fair, on penalty of £1 or $3.30 fine, half of which would go to the town and half would go to the informer, whoever informed them. In 1831, anti-drinking forces persuaded the town to discontinue its sponsorship of the fair, but it seemed to continue on a quasi-official basis near the First Parish Church until around 1837. In 1839, the only public house in Upper Village where the fair had been held became a strictly temperance tavern. The bar was removed and no intoxicating drinks were to be obtained. A number of persons on assembling at the usual time, finding this to be the case, at once withdrew and no traces of the fair remained in Derry. That was Reverend Parker stating that. The June 1850 session of the legislature repealed the part of the 1722 charter authorizing the town to hold the fair. In 1881, an anti-Irish article in the Derry News blamed the Irish. Afterwards, Donnybrook innovations were introduced by the Irish element and later it became much demoralized. Whiskey in the jug was freely circulated and the splinter of shillelagh flourished promiscuously over the heads of those sons of Erin who were spoiling for a fray. So, back to Donnybrook. So, of course, all the alcohol and drinking led to rowdyism. The fair, after left Derry, it was held at White's Tavern in Londonderry, and then in Epping, New Hampshire, until 1850 when the charter. Okay, so drinking and was a major part. Rowdyism, horse racing was also a big part of the fair. In G, in the Exeter newsletter, attributed to the Revolutionary War veterans who could not sit quietly down at once and assume staid habits that required excitement. Passionate sportsmen who appreciated thoroughbreds. In particular, race between Butler's horse and Craigie mare on the plain between Dr. Tom's and Captain Martin's houses on the mile-long flat stretch running north on Lane Road. Bets were for $100 down to a cup of grog. Craig won and Butler never attended another fair. In the aftermath of some of these horse races, the fair grounds looked like a vast charnel house, the fields and woodlands strewn with corpses of horses that were just worn out. In addition to horse racing, there's boxing. There's a local poet that neither by the name of Moses Leggett Nail that neither I nor Brick could identify further. But the G in the Exeter newsletter quoted a couplet from one of his poems about the Derry Fair, written sometime in the 1790s. 2 or 3 bullies stripped to the buff, 2 or 3 noses bloodied enough. Most of the fighting was between visitors, but sometimes natives were driven into a row who never gave nor received an insult. And one other aspect of the old market fairs in Londonderry, they have generally been visited by every wonder that has astonished the world since the days of ancient Egypt. Jugglers, rope dancers, and mountebanks of every character from the old world and the invisible lady of the new. These included Harrington, the Scotchman, and Jonetta, the Italian, famed for their powers of balance and gymnastics. Samuel Russell, the honest horse jockey. Droop, the old piper. The legless bee who danced on his knees. Jim Taylor, the African man-eater who crawled through a hollow 40-foot white oak log. Fiddler Bill W., who told the funniest stories. The Loos, a family of black musicians. And sharp-tongued and soft-voiced Perry the Barber. Okay. Now between the market fairs, colonial market fairs, and the modern agricultural fairs, there was an agricultural improvement movement in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And this was part of the Village Enlightenment in New England, so named by historian David Jaffe. And in the early 18 teens and 20s, Derry was part of partook of the Village Enlightenment. It came earlier for other towns and villages around Boston, but an economic intensification and cultural sophistication. In Londonderry, there was improvements in the communication and transportation infrastructure. Post office was created in 1795, and Dr. Isaac Thomas postmaster. The Londonderry Turnpike was incorporated in 1804 and opened in 1806, giving direct passage from Concord to the Massachusetts border that ran right through Lower Derry Village. Travelers could link up with the Essex Turnpike and then the Andover and Medford Turnpikes to the market at Medford outside Boston. Stage lines along the turnpikes, taverns, Tom Willie, John Pinkerton, Boynton's, Holland's, White's, it was all part of the infrastructure. Education, Pinkerton Academy was created in 1814, Lane Female Academy, 1823, Young Ladies Seminary, also known as Miss Fay and Miss Washburn School on Crescent Street in 1829. Financial and commercial infrastructure was the Derry Bank in Upper Village was established in 1829. Earlier there were stores, Major John Pinkerton Brothers, William Choate and Peter Patterson in Lower Derry Village. And then a political rationalization when the town was split in 1827. This all poised Derry for economic takeoff. 150 miles away in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, retired Albany banker, gentleman farmer, and woolens manufacturer, and merino sheep promoter, all in one, Elkanah Watson, whose dates were 1758 to 1842, was developing the modern Berkshire system of agricultural societies based on an annual agricultural fair. Sorry, that's not clear. And the first Pittsfield Fair was held while a private cattle show, kind of sending up a balloon, was in 1810, and the Berkshire Agricultural Society was created in 1811 and held its first fair that fall. And Watson publicized it in newspapers and pamphlets and word of mouth, 1810 to 1816. And it was all, it originated as one way of promoting merino sheep, which was a fine fleeced breed of sheep from Spain. I don't think I have time to get into the merino sheep craze, which is a wild and woolly subject. But the fair features that Watson and his colleagues developed. Watson felt that excitements are necessary to lead the people to a knowledge of their true interests, giving respectability to the honorable profession of a farmer. I like to think of it as food, folks, and fun. institution. The purpose was education, and this was manifested through exhibitions of livestock and agricultural implements, discussions between farmers, annual agriculture addresses given by either a local elite or visiting dignitaries. These weren't necessarily practical, but more inspirational. Emulation was the second major point of fairs, to get people to compete and improve agriculture that way, everyone trying to outdo each other, for premium awards. Used to be silver cups, trophies, and now it's blue ribbons. And diplomas were awarded. I don't have one for Berkshire Society. This is for the New York State Agricultural Society. But I mean, these would look cool hanging over your mantelpiece. The third point, the third E of the fairs was éclat, French word meaning brilliancy, radiance, dazzling effect, sensation. Watson would have elaborate award ceremonies. There were processions and parades of agricultural society members. It was all to make not just everything visible, but making people feel good about themselves and just providing some excitement, and could be a dreary rural existence. Entertainment, such as were being held at market fairs, but entertainment at these first agricultural fairs were formalized and kept in tight control. And they were to appeal to both sexes. They had religious exercises, hymn singing, agricultural dinners with toasting. So there was alcohol, but it was controlled and ritualized. Agricultural balls and dances, where women could compete with, who wore the most au courant fashions. Plowing matches, and even later harness racing and horse racing. So, because plowing matches are only so exciting. And fifthly, economic enhancement, which just as in the market fair, there were opportunities to sell livestock, arrange for stud services, barter or sell or trade household and commercial manufacturers, and the producers of agricultural implements, they could have a place to advertise their machinery and implements. Now, the clergy in Pittsfield initially refused to support the Berkshire Agricultural Fair, even though it had like religious exercises that Watson wanted to hold in the church. And Watson claimed that they did refuse to condone the fair because they considered it a bubble of the moment and they would make themselves ridiculous. But more likely, they were familiar with the Londonderry fairs, and generally market fairs had a bad reputation, and they didn't want to bring that into the community. But the new agricultural societies based on fairs spread across New England and the Northeast, chiefly by state support. Each of the state legislatures would not only pass acts to incorporate an agricultural society, they also appropriated funds to support the premium programs of the different societies. Okay, let's see. In New Hampshire, December 1812, the state passed an act of incorporation for a state agricultural society to promote and encourage agriculture, economy, and husbandry, and useful domestic manufactures, with the right and power to ordain and grant premiums and medals or other gratuities as rewards of merit, exertion, discovery, or improvement. But this state society never really took off, and it was the county agricultural societies that were first on the ground in the state. And first was the Rockingham County Agricultural Society, which was incorporated in 1814. It published its first premium list for its first fair in August 1818. So it took a while to get things going. But it offered seven premiums totaling $100. And you can read that. For persons who shall produce evidence to the society of having raised the greatest quantity of wheat present year, for the largest crop of corn, largest crop of potatoes, barley, turnips, who shall exhibit to the society the best proportioned bull and the best plow. And if you notice, one of the, well, to excite a spirit of emulation and for actual improvement in husbandry. Well, one of the committee members was E.H. Derby, who we'll mention again. Unfortunately, the Rockingham Society did not hold the first agricultural fair in the Cheshire County Agricultural Society's fair actually happened first in October 1818, and the Rockingham Fair held in Chester that year was a little bit later. I think it might have been November. It's hard to there's not a lot of information or surviving materials on the early Rockingham County Society. But the first fair was in Chester, but it traveled, it wasn't permanently located. And the 1825 fair was held in Londonderry, probably on the site where the market fair was. 1826 and 28, 29, and 67, it was held in Exeter. And premiums went up from, let's see, 1828, there were 37 premiums with $174, and by 1867 there were 172 premiums worth $586.50. And this is also reflective of the increase in support from the state that went directly to premiums. Okay. You can read that. This is the 1825 Rockingham Agricultural Society premium list published in the New England Farmer. I just want to point out on this some of the winners. Major Peter Patterson, who was a partner of Captain William Choate, store and town clerk of Londonderry. He was the only premium winner at the 1828 fair, but he was also a director by then. A premium in 1825, Maria McGregor, sister of Mary Ann McGregor, who was wife of Reverend John Ripley Adams, won premium. Martha Fisher, daughter of Deacon Samuel Fisher. Peggy McKean, the widow of John McKean. They all won premiums at this fair. Also, General Elias Haskett Derby, who was on the premium committee in 1818. And by 1825, he was a director of the Rockingham Agricultural Society. 1825, he won a premium for the best heifer, and another one for the best merino ram, another one for the largest quantity of potatoes on 1 acre, and finally another one for the second largest quantity of root crops, proper for feeding cattle. So this Derby From this ad in 1825, imported merino sheep. These were for sale. Said he won a premium at the Brighton show of the Massachusetts Society of Promoting Agriculture. So that must have been before he moved to New Hampshire, to Londonderry. And his brother Ezekiel Hersey Derby of Salem was on the committee for the Brighton shows. Best image I could find of Derby. Was born in 1766, the son of a wealthy Salem, Massachusetts East Indies merchant, also named Elias Hesketh Derby. His son was Brigadier General of the Essex County Militia, and a gentleman extensively known and universally esteemed for his honorable principles, his generous feelings, and his private virtues. After several failed trading ventures, he moved to Londonderry, probably around 1810. In his estate and mansion on Lane Road, the current location of the law office of Rebecca Rudder. The house itself burned. He became a gentleman farmer and manufactured woolen broadcloth during the War of 1812. And as he mentioned in his ad, his merino sheep premiums won. His merino sheep won premiums at the Brighton Fair, which was the big state fair at the time in Massachusetts. He's buried in Forest Hill Cemetery, and that's his gravestone. Colonel George Washington Lane purchased his estate and flocks in 1869. Then the Rockingham Agricultural Society closed up shop in 1829. But a new one was organized in 1852 and held its first fair at Exeter in 1853 and awarded 113 premiums totaling $271. Henry Flagg French of Exeter at the time was chair of the committee for awarding premiums for the county's best farm that year. By 1852 to 1859, he was president of the New Rockingham Agricultural Society. He was originally from Chester and was a student at Pinkerton Academy in the 1820s. Very famous person and a favorite of Mr. Holmes.
Where was that farm that you just showed here?
That was on Lane Road.
Does it still exist?
Not the estate.
The house?
The house, no. When did the house burn?
1926. And by 1928, they moved a house from the traffic circle to that spot. It was burnt in 1947. So there's almost nothing left of the original place.
So who's this gentleman now?
This is Henry Flagg French. Later went on to become Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. I think that's his highest
Right.
post.
Under 3 presidents, he was acting Secretary of the Treasury.
As I mentioned before, the New Hampshire state legislature supported agricultural organizations, first by incorporating the societies, also by giving direct grants for premiums. And you could tell how successful or unsuccessful fairs were depending on how much they got from the state. In 1817, the state gave $100 to each county agricultural society and increased it in 1818 to $300. In 1820, it cut the grants down to $100 and denied payment to 4 societies, including Rockingham, because they never sent in reports on what they did with the money state also created a state board of agriculture in 1820 to 1824, but it didn't appropriate any money. It published only one issue of the New Hampshire Agricultural Repository, which was a journal that was supposed to have helpful information on agricultural improvements. That one issue, the public exhibitions of our agricultural societies are calculated to correct erroneous opinions and prejudices. When our farmers see that at these public shows stock superior to their own, when they hear accounts of extraordinary crops well attested, and see newer, improved tools or machines for facilitating their labor, they can no longer doubt. A spirit of emulation rises in their breasts. But the board was defunct by 1824, and all legislative assistance was removed from 1824 to 1849. In 1849, the New Hampshire State Agricultural Society was organized and held the first state fairs. First one was held in Concord, but it wasn't permanently located. It traveled. Third fair in 1852 was held in Meredith. It was held in Manchester numerous times, including the last one in 1860. I'm sorry, that's actually the Tilton State Grange Fair. Oops. Okay. And one of the founding vice presidents of the New Hampshire Agricultural Society was William Choate, Esquire of Derry, one of Derry's first representatives to the General Court. After Londonderry split off in 1827, and the son of Captain William Choate, who built a store in 1825 where Association Hall now stands. Was the son-in-law of Deacon James Pinkerton. In 1870, a second Board of Agriculture was created by the state legislature, and it supported public institutes, reports, encouraged societies of fairs and exhibitions. And by this time, there are other institutions that were taking over the educational aspects of the fair, such as Experiment Station in Durham. In 1887, Agricultural College was first located at Dartmouth in 1862, and then moved to Durham in 1891. I was looking through the register. There are no students from Derry or Londonderry at the Agricultural College in Durham. In 1895-96 was the only register I had. But Charles Harvey Hood graduated in 1880, who was the son of Harvey P. Hood. But back to Derry. There's a Derry Agricultural Society founded in 1872. According to the third report of the Secretary of the Board of Agriculture, in 1873, it described the Derry Agricultural Society and under President Harvey P. Hood, and its annual town fair that was held at the Old Town Hall, which is now Upper Village Hall, on October 1872. Also in the late 1800s, the National Grange of the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry, also known as the Grange, was founded in 1867, which was a fraternal organization that encouraged families to band together to promote the economic and political well-being of the community and agriculture. And in New Hampshire, the first Grange was founded in Exeter in August 1873. State Grange was organized in Manchester in December 1873 and held fairs in Tilton. State Grange Fair, that was this. And the Grange Fair was held in Derry. I'm not sure when they started, but the Nutfield Grange was organized September 1874 under the first master, W.O. Noyce. I have one of the few photographs we have of an actual fair in Derry. It was the Grange Fair in 1909. And speaking of the Grange, I have to mention Horace A. Hill, who was a Derry native, born in 1839, and a Pinkerton graduate. He was master and overseer of the Eastern New Hampshire Pomona Grange. The Pomona Granges were the larger, like county-wide organizations, and the subordinate ranges such as Knoxville Grange number 37 were underneath that. He was also, the Eastern New Hampshire Pomona Grange was the largest one in New England. And Horace Hill was also the assistant or the chief marshal at the State Grange Fair in the 1890s. By the 1890s, there were 15 Pomona Granges in New Hampshire and 219 active subordinate Granges with a membership of 25,000 people across New Hampshire. Okay, in the 20th century, we call this the post-agricultural era because, once the railroad came to Derry and Derry started industrializing shoe factories and everything, agriculture started taking a backseat in the local economy. And it became more specialized, which was what the agricultural improvers wanted all along, to find strategies and products that could fit local conditions and be easily transportable to markets. So in 1892, Derry was producing $28,000 worth of milk, $10,000 worth of fruit, $2,000 worth of vegetables, and $2,000 worth of hay. And in the report to the Commissioner of Agriculture's report to the governor, said that 1/3 of young men stayed on the farm in Derry compared to 1/4 in Londonderry. But there's not much demand for farm labor. So there's one final agricultural society and fair I want to talk about. The West Rockingham Agricultural Society, which was a post-World War II institution. It held its first fair October 10th to 11th, 1947. It was organized in November 1946 in a meeting at Pinkerton Academy, and it held the first fair on land at the end of Pleasant Street, owned by Mrs. Helen Hood, which I believe she donated for Hood School. So you know, that's correct. And in 1948, the fair was moved to the old McGregor farm, owned by Morris Lardhoven on Franklin Street, and it attracted 8,000 fairgoers. And that's the Manchester Fair, these are out of order. So this was an ad flyer for the West Rockingham Fair in 1948. It had mammoth horse pulling, agricultural livestock exhibits, 4-H was founded by them, the Grange exhibits, children's amusements, rides, concerts, contests, and 6 big top-notch entertainment acts, comedy, aerial thriller, acrobatics, Captain Anderson's Circus, Pony and Dogs, Monkeys, Goats, fun for all ages. So it's like just what we would see today. Fair in Derry because they overextended themselves. It did attract 8,000 fairgoers, but apparently the overhead hiring 6 vaudeville acts was just too much. In 1949, the fair president, Donald Bentley, announced the society voted to liquidate, and there was no 1949 fair. So the last Derry fair was this one in 1948. That's what I have. Any questions in general?
And those fairgrounds were where? I missed that.
I guess Franklin Street extended now where the apartment complex is.
So very when did horse pulling become one of the major events at the fairs in New Hampshire?
Not sure, New Hampshire, probably early on, probably like the first Rockingham Fair in the 18 teens. I know oxen pulls were very popular in Worcester and other venues in Massachusetts, but I'm not sure if horses were that early too. Any idea, Rick?
I think farmers being naturally competitive, as soon as there was draft animals, they were pitting to see who had the strongest ones.
Right.
And of course, they came later. It was the oxen
Right.
who were the start here.
Right.
And so I would probably guess the 1820s, 1830s, someplace around there.
For the Percherons and
Right, yeah.
Clydesdales and-
You know, you don't hear many before that time.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Don't forget, please, to fill out an evaluation